Hope everyone's well today. I just wanted to thank you for attending our webinar. I'm Rachel Guay. I'm the CXO at EQengineered. At EQengineered, we unlock, connect, and transform your business through the design and development of innovative, intuitive digital products. Today, I wanted to share about design systems in the 9 states. First, we will talk about current enterprise design pain points, the landscape today, the benefits to a design system. Then we will move into what a design system consists of and take a deep dive into the 9 states. No worries, we will send a follow-up to our webinar that will include the slides from today. So please feel free to pay attention at this moment and not have to grab any screen grabs. Enterprise design has its pain points, like many other areas, such as legacy technology, many tech stacks, keeping portions of the software going, inconsistent UX, there's a change in experience patterns, navigation, visual cues, and design. There's a lot of one-offs and band-aids to make sure that everything's moving and staying up to date. There's some version control issues and many designers and developers, and without a design system in place, new designer sees things in their way without knowledge and background as to why decisions have been made, which then in turn can create some inconsistent branding, inefficient process, and repetitive erased work. Seeing value in taking time out to do it, getting rid of tech debt, updating experiences to be more consistent, etc. And there are also pain point of knowledge gaps between design and development, especially with technology changing at the rate that it is without these systems in place. It only exponentially creates more problems. One of the top challenges found in enterprise UX, the state of the industry, the 2018 by UXPin was that 59% of people within enterprise highlighted that improving consistency is their top challenge. There are many reasons why. First of which, design doesn't scale like engineering. Teams grow, design processes eventually break unless tools and guidelines are in place. As I said earlier, a new designer may introduce inconsistencies, slight changes in color, typefaces, or design patterns. Also, due to the complexity of B2B organizations, there are usually multiple products with multiple product owners. And enterprise is changing. Enterprise UX is changing. And to top it all off, your users are expecting innovative digital experiences. Startups like Gusto, Stripe, and Slack are setting the stage that business products should be useful, usable, and satisfying. Even large organizations like IBM, GE, and Salesforce are positioning design as a competitive advantage and hiring thousands of designers to reshape processes and culture. If you have any questions as I'm going through this webinar, please use your chat function within the software to raise your hand, and we're happy to get back to you with it. Now, what is a design system? It's essentially a blueprint for product design and development. And the benefits to this is that it will create consistency, cohesion across tech stacks. It will allow you to save time and money by creating reusable components. It'll create consistent vocabulary, so whether you're a designer, a developer, a product manager, everyone's talking about the same thing. It will allow you to implement faster. You're able to, once you have a full system in place, you're able to create prototypes and get business on board with things that you're doing and things that you may want to improve upon. You're able to concentrate on the UX flows instead of the design discussions. It's less about colors, fonts, patterns as far as interaction, navigation, things like that are already set. And it's more about how do we get from this page to that page. It's more about what is the experience for the user, really trying to bring in that human experience. It will also create a single source of truth. so that you're able to go back to it. Everyone's able to have a consistent moment. So if something's out of spec, out of the ordinary, not within your system, you're able to point to it. You're able to then rectify it in a manner that's much earlier in the process versus launching it and then seeing the issues that you have with it. I wanted to deep dive now into the design system elements. There are 4 main areas: foundations and principles, brand guidelines, design and patterns library, which includes UX, UI, interaction, and code. So the biggest thing for you to be able, before you create this system, or the first step within the system, is really laying your foundations and principles. What are your guiding design principles? Are they clarity, efficiency, beauty, consistency? What are those common threads that you can always point to as you're moving through this process? What is your grid alignment? How do you have things set up? What is your scaling, especially scaling in regards to responsive and as you move towards mobile? Accessibility. What are you choosing to make sure that you're completely accessible with? How are you making sure that everyone can see what you're doing? And how are you implementing that? And also animations, interaction design. That texture that sets forth and differentiates you between just another application. And the next piece is brand guidelines. Creating a living, breathing document, something that's able to change as needed as you continue to go along and find some use cases that may require something a little bit different. And it's not your typical style guide from the more standard kind of print PDFs. Ideally, this is something that's living online, that people are able to see, that it's very transferable. Fonts, colors, backgrounds, your overall visual language, your texture. What images do you use? What do you not use? Voice and tone. And syntax and styling, like, do you always have initial caps? How do you treat series commas or the Oxford comma? These things help maintain consistency throughout. And by setting that stage, you're able to then now move into designing your patterns library and your design library. Designing components. We typically have a header, a paragraph, and a button. All those pieces, that's a full component system, especially if you have a repeatable multiple areas, whether it's pages of a website or pages within an application. Behaviors, the 9 states, designing for that is really, really important. And I'm going to go into that on a little deeper level in just a moment. Overall page templates. Having consistency to make sure as a user is navigating through and creating that experience that's consistent and cohesive is really, really important. And design reference files. How are people that aren't living and breathing this, whether it's your product manager, whether it's your project manager, how are people able to refer to some of these pieces? Along with how are designers and developers able to talk within the same language? By creating these design reference files, it allows you to have something to point to, allows you to have something to refer to. Now I want to take a few minutes and talk specifically about the 9 states. I feel that this is where it separates something good from something great. Being able to design for all moments instead of just an initial state. A lot of times with designers and UX take a look at a page, we don't really think about when there's something else there. Just designing for one state isn't the case anymore. So the first three states are nothing, loading, and empty. Nothing, you have a little bit of data, it could be your first keystroke on input, or the first item, the last one left. It may be the first time the user sees it, such as a welcome screen, or overlays for onboarding, as in the example shown here. And many people have moved to this kind of skeletal loading. Loading is informing the user that content is coming. We don't always have the spinny wheel or the progress bars, but being able to kind of show this skeletal system knows that content is going to be loaded. It's just taking a moment. The loading experience should provide feedback, reduce the user's uncertainty, and offer a reason to wait, and reduce the user's perception of time. And finally here, it's empty. What do we do with a component with nothing in it? What do you do with that blank space? Many times it can be filled with content to get the user to do something or reward them. The next three states are one, some, and too many. One, what do you do when you have just a little bit of data? How do you fill that space? And within that, many times, such as the example here that you see on it, within a shopping cart, what do you do with that extra space there? How do you get people to potentially buy more things if that's a goal of this screen? You can add a matching pair of shorts within this example here. How do you then add something to it that will also help the experience of the user? Maybe they would like a pair of shorts within that. And again, this is depending on the screen goals and business goals that have been set forth for this example here. Some content is generally the ideal state. It's usually the one that most designers design for. It allows, it's usually the optimal screen. What does everything look like when data is filled in, when things are there and it's not too crowded? And what happens when there's a lot of content? What happens if there's lots of pages? How do you create that page navigation? What happens if you have a grid that contains a lot of content? If you're, say if you're doing a lot of financial work and there's many, many grids, but how do you make that grid expandable? How do you allow it to still be seen as a snapshot? Where do you apply scrolling to it? How do you create that more element if that's it? Dealing with that overflow of content is really important to consider because not everything is going to be optimal. In the last three of the 9 states is incorrect and correct. How are you providing feedback, contextual feedback, and giving that to the user so that they know that what they're doing is right or wrong? Done, which is a moment that you want to make sure that someone understands when they've finished with something, when something's been completed, that input's been received, positive feedback's been given, and contextually relevant content gets displayed. And where they get taken to next is also important within that. And last but not least, which is many of the things that get designed for and thought of, is the normal, the hover, the focus. People, a lot of times when they think about states, they think about it in terms of buttons. And this is one that gets commonly designed for, but making sure that you don't forget about things such as toggles and sliders. Like what happens when it's disabled, when it's expanded? Now that you've understood the 9 states, the last part of the design system is the code. So taking all those things that have been designed out and then implementing them within component-based code. And when you're doing that, you're thinking about the standards. Like what are your coding standards? Do you use tabs within your code, etc.? What are your supported browsers? are you supporting some lower levels of IE that create a lot of havoc? And if you are, how are you making sure that both your design and code is able to be seen through those? Supported devices. What are you doing? If this is not a responsive build, then how are you making sure that you support the smallest screen to the largest screen that's going to be accessing this? Having a system of versioning, being able to point back to what was launched when, along with being able to have a clear, consistent form of that so that a user is also able to tell is important. And last but not least, implementation. What's both your system of implementation and also who takes care of that implementation and where are there checks and balances within that? So to bring this to life, I wanted to show a potential implementation roadmap. Initially, that first step of defining the foundations and principles, I usually like to do it with a kickoff workshop, get everybody together in a room, be able to help all the people be able to download each other on what they feel are the guidelines, what are the design principles such as the clarity, the efficiency, the beauty, the consistency. Like, what are those things? Help them define the grid system. What do we want to support? How do we think things should be set up? Defining the accessibility guidelines. And then responsive scaling. What are we choosing? Where do we think where some of these breakpoints are, et cetera. And then I like to see a lot of times people come and they go, I have a brand. It's great, it's set. And when I get handed it and then I look at it, I want to do a gap analysis to it, see where things are missing. A lot of times when people say they have a brand guidelines, generally it's a print brand guidelines. It's not a guidelines for the web. It does not include many of the things that we talked about, and as far as some of the states of the components and things like that. Usually it has fonts and colors, but some of the colors aren't even web-safe colors, they're Pantone colors, et cetera. So where are those gaps? What do we now need to do in order to bring that to a place that we're able to work with it? The next thing is a UI inventory and analysis. You can do a workshop here that you can print out all the screens, cut out different components to see that what happens as far as things that are inconsistent, things that aren't treated the same, things that may be the same. You may find that there's certain things like navigation is very consistent, everything's good with that, but the way in which we treat call to action buttons or secondary buttons, the way in which headlines are treated or body copy, etc., the way in which you move from place to place and how you X out of something is very different. So being able to put some tangibles to that as far as what is consistent and what is inconsistent, and then being able to pick of the inconsistencies, what way you want to drive it forward is really important. So a lot of times you, within that, you can do a component inventory, you map the tech steps, et cetera, to that in order to get a full holistic view, knowing what you're walking into. We may not be able to change X, Y, and Z because of the tech stack it's on and the tech that it has, and then making a decision whether or not you want to be able to go change that. And last but not least is the design and pattern library development. Designing component reference files, page templates, and then pushing that into a code library so people are able to then just use that reference code to build a page quicker, to try something, to prototype. It creates a much more straightforward way of building. Along with it creates a much more consistent experience by having those things in place. Thank you very much for attending today. I really appreciate everyone being here for that. If you have any questions or comments or just want to connect, please reach out to me. As you can see, you can email me. Please connect with me on social. I like to hear what other people have to say too and see what's going on. Does anybody have any questions today?
Rachel, I believe Julian had a question. He'd asked, in the States, could you share more about the difference between empty and nothing?
Okay, let me go back. So nothing is generally the initial, it's usually the initial loading of an application to it. It means it has completely nothing in there. Empty can be a state in which you've deleted everything and now you're put back through. They're somewhat similar, but empty generally is a state that comes back to, and nothing is usually more of a data point issue. Julian, does that answer your question?
Yeah, that's good. Thank you.
If we don't have any more questions, I'm going to end the webinar. Thank you very much for everyone for attending. I really appreciate your questions and you making the time today.